I've recently completed a remote viewing project where I was tasked to explore Edgar Casey at the moment of his death, that transition from one reality to the next. And in that process, I got to glimpse aspects of his life, and I think I also explored aspects of the Akashic Records. For those not familiar with the Akashic Records, Edgar Casey, known as the Sleeping Prophet, used to go into a trance state and access what he referred to as the Akashic Records, which it has been described as information about everything and anything that has ever and will ever happen. And there's a lot of fascinating Edgar Casey predictions, prophecies, um, insights that are out there. I haven't studied him at length, but he's someone that I'm definitely familiar with. My data that I brought back corroborates some of who he was, or at least some of the stories about who he was. But what really caught me was my second session, especially, and I saw it in the first session, but really in the second session, I got a better glimpse of the Akashic Records. What I'm thinking were the Akashic Records, and it was a powerful experience for me as a remote viewer, especially over the last 6 months to a year. I think just as I've been improving as a viewer, and through opportunities like Hellfire, Future Forecasting Group, and now being a part of the Down the Rabbit Hole team that's run by Daz through Future Forecasting. I'm having these experiences that are giving me really profound insights, and in some ways it's the experiences I've always hoped to have as a truth seeker, as someone who is trying to better understand my own mind, my own consciousness, my own existence, really, and the nature of reality. And there's times I feel that I'm led to data or information or experiences, I have to wonder: is there a higher purpose to it, or am I guiding myself on something that just simply interests me? Either way, I find it valuable and incredibly fulfilling and interesting. I've got a lot of projects that I've been working over the last, I guess, month or so. I finished school for the summer about 2 weeks ago now. I've been involved in Hellfire targets, personal targets, rabbit hole targets. And I'm at a point right now where I feel I need to clear some things out of my system in order to get more clarity in my remote viewing. And this project being one of them, I finished it maybe about a week ago, and this video has been looming in my mind because I know sometimes as a part of my process on these bigger experiences, I need to talk about it. I need to put it, whether it gets released or not, having this conversation helps me to better engage and understand my data. I think this is what closes the loop for me, is fully processing feedback and my experience. And I feel this is one project among a few. I've got probably about 3 right now that were pretty significant for me on a personal spiritual level. And before I take on another project, I need to clear this stuff out of my conscious, my psyche, whatever the term is. So that's what I'm looking at right now. And those that follow the work that I do, I certainly look at remote viewing, psychic abilities, our consciousness, our awareness. And I have a strong interest in AI, and the parallels to the simulation theory, the simulation argument. So all these things that run through my mind all the time. And looking at the Akashic Records, man, it's given me a lot to think about in terms of that. So I'm excited to talk about that with all of you. I have another project that I completed that I don't know if I'm going to put how much of this I'm going to put out publicly, because I'm trying to determine how much of this is just too personal for me. But I've done a combination of targets recently, targets where I'm looking at one where I was looking at my future consciousness, which I do about monthly, where I just set myself to connect with my own awareness or consciousness at a future point in time. And I brought back some very profound insights. Now, that's a front-loaded target. I fully acknowledge that. But the information I bring back, number one, is valuable. Number two, at times I bring back predictions that I'd have no way of knowing, front-loaded or not, that come true. So I'm confident in the data that I bring back. But I also worked a blind target with the Rabbit Hole group, where, long story short, we were looking at, I can't reveal what the target was because it's not public yet, but the mystery target we were tasked to look at, none of us had any data on it, which leads the team to believe that this mystery is nothing but a story. It doesn't exist. So we all went off in different directions, and I went on to describe, I had a transcendent experience, and I think that my consciousness was looking at me. And this was a completely blind situation, and I described a lot of things, this wonderful, amazing spiritual journey. It was a beautiful session, a session where I felt that I transcended, and ended up had one of those experiences. And at the time, I thought I was describing whoever was the focus of the tasking, but I ended up describing an experience of that universal oneness, being one with everything, and losing a sense of yourself. And then I had these sensations that stuck with me. I did 3 sessions. On 2 of those sessions, I experienced these realms where I felt it hours after. I just felt different in my mind, like I was still connected to whatever this was. So I think I need to get a lot of these things out of my system, because I'm starting to wonder if there is a separate packet of information that I'm slowly pulling through. Part of me is tempted to do a front-loaded session to see if I can clear all that information out, but part of me also feels like this information is coming to me through the coincidence or synchronicity of some of the projects I'm assigned to, and also because of some of my interests. I think I find this information that exists within the targets I'm looking at. Of course, we have to acknowledge that, well, maybe it's just my imagination. And yeah, that's 100% possible. I will say, though, that at least consciously, when I'm doing these projects, I'm not actively seeking that information out. It's more that I find a thread and then I go into a flow. And those of you that remote view, you understand what it is to be in that flow state. It feels different than when I'm just going to sit here and think, well, what if? So anyway, that's been my experience. That's what I'm working through right now, and it's been fascinating for me. So I'm going to share this Edgar Casey project that I did, and talk a little bit about my experience with it. So Edgar Casey and the Akashic Records. This was target 4106-7771. This is a blind remote viewing project for me. I used ChatGPT as my tasker. Now, just the other day, I was following a thread on Reddit, and it started off by somebody, I think they were a new remote viewer, saying how wonderful they were doing with the remote viewing sessions through using ChatGPT. And one of the commenters was trying to dissect, this level of success for a newbie, and really for anybody. And it sounds like what they were doing, and this is something that I did in my early days experimenting with ChatGPT, they were treating it like a human tasker. And with a human tasker, it's like, hey, I'm going to work a remote viewing project. Do you have a target? Yes, I have a target. I work the target with the target ID number that it gives me, and then I submit my feedback to the tasker, and the tasker looks at the feedback and gives me, sometimes they'll give me a movement order, or sometimes they'll say, okay, the project's done. Here's your feedback. So with ChatGPT, it sounds like what this person did and what I have done in the past, I do my target, and then I give it highlights of, okay, here's all the things I experienced, here's the summary of my data, and then ChatGPT gives me what the target was. Well, what I suspect happened when I did it that way, I only did it that way one time, was that I told it I was going to do a project, it gave me an ID number, and then I sent it my summary, and it then gave me a target. Well, obviously the target matched because I feel that it didn't create the target until it saw my summary. It doesn't think like a human mind. So it didn't create the target until I said, give me the target. It's not like it put the target in a queue and was holding it in its mind. So what I've done now is I won't even connect with ChatGPT. Sometimes I don't even know if ChatGPT is going to be where I'm getting my target from. I will do a session. I will do a blind session with no idea. Sometimes I say I'll go to ChatGPT. Sometimes I know I'm going to go to a target pool, but sometimes I don't know. I just do a blind session. And if I'm going to use ChatGPT, after I'm done my session, I will take my target ID and I'll tell ChatGPT, I just completed a remote viewing session. Here's my target ID. And that's all I give it. And then ChatGPT will give me the target post session. So that way it ensures I'm 100% blind. I'm not feeding ChatGPT any information other than I just completed a target. But I noticed that ChatGPT was giving me targets that were based on my interests, since I use ChatGPT for, a lot of things in the background with, whether it's research or putting together timelines and things for the work that I do. So it's familiar with what my interests are. So I've been training ChatGPT on how to not only create a tasking, but to be a tasker, ensuring that it's maintaining blind protocols and randomizing things. So obviously I enjoy exploring mystery targets, but it's important to calibrate yourself too. So I have it throwing in random calibration targets, and I never know when they're going to come. So last week I was assigned to look at the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, just as an example. So I feel fairly confident in this being blind now when ChatGPT gives me targets. And this Edgar Casey project is a result of that totally blind tasking, not knowing whether I was going to be looking at the Eiffel Tower in Paris or something more mysterious. So that's the backstory on this. So I'm going to go through my data now. I know you've kind of a long backstory on that, on all of that stuff, but I'm just trying to get these thoughts and these ideas out. So let's get into it. So this was the actual tasking. So my project was complete, and then I said, okay, what was I looking at? And the tasking came back to describe the primary consciousness present at the coordinates associated with the moment immediately following the physical death of the individual known as Edgar Casey, March 3rd, 1945, around 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Virginia Beach, Virginia. There were some sub-cues, some things to focus on. The location and condition of the primary consciousness. Any transition phenomena occurring between physical and non-physical, the presence of other entities, guides, or energies, and any sense of movement, continuation, or message transmission. You may follow the trajectory of this consciousness as far as your signal line allows, while remaining tethered to the original intent of the target. So I like that last piece. That tells me that it's starting to understand. Don't go too far off on a rabbit hole that has nothing to do with what this target is, keeping me close to it. These are a lot of sub cues here. I don't know, so it's something I'll work on with in terms of, just to keep me focused. But overall, this was a great experience, and I brought back, I think, some of the typical woo things that we really can't verify, but there's also other elements that I think are verifiable to who Edgar Casey was and his life. Starting here, just low-level data at the very beginning. I was connected to life, a structure, and energetics here. And this theme I think I expanded on as I went through it, as you can see. Looking at this, almost what looks like a factory with some energy surrounding it. It was glowing and it was radiating outwards, this energetics that I was seeing. There's this heavy downward pressure, and then I see this life, and this life was coming out of the structure. I identified this life as female. There was something that felt feminine about this life, but they had masculine qualities. Short black hair, they were wearing a business suit, there was a stern or serious expression, and I could hear shoes walking on the pavement. And I felt like she was in charge. Very serious, or was she frustrated? Carrying a book or files, and I wrote that this was important. And I'll get into why in a little bit here. A sense of disappointment that she had just left a meeting or had an engagement that put her in this mood. Was it a call to action? So here's what's pretty cool. So there's my sketch, and I blew up the sketch here. That's what Edgar Casey looked like. I am typically not successful. I've never really tried, because I'm just not an artist, to draw the face. But this time I said, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. I'm really been pushing myself as a viewer, and I feel this is a pretty spot-on sketch of Edgar Casey. So even though I identified him as female, um, I did add that it were masculine qualities, and this sketch looks like a masculine person. So there's my sketch of Edgar Casey, and again, carrying that book, which I think is important. I was drawn to this book here. I was trying to describe the content, and I just wrote data she collected or prepared. It's a problem or course of action identified, but it was rejected or not well received. She knows something or believes something that feels important. The rejection creates a sense of urgency. In looking at Edgar Casey here, let's go into this a little bit more. This is one life versus a group. One life versus a group of lives. They were tied or connected to a structure, a connection, or a relationship. And I felt that they were loving and kind, and there was this familiar bond of trust, a very close working relationship. I don't know if this is Edgar Casey and members of his family, or if this is Edgar Casey and, he did report, at first he identified them as just smaller people when he was younger that he used to see that would kind of teach him things. He definitely saw beings from other realities, I would say, throughout his life as teachers or as guides. So I don't know if this is what he's connecting with after he died. I don't know if this is noise. I don't know if this is his family as I'm coming through this information. But life is coming to them, a sense of being absorbed by them. And that makes me think maybe this is after death. They were warm and welcoming, but there was something sharp and jagged, abrasive, undesired. Where did it come from? It was unexpected. It was agitated. And this is interesting. Like a random piece of metal tossed in the machine, this can cause serious damage, a sense of being embedded. Life wants to be accepted. The object is painful, and the group does not address it or take it seriously. It makes her, meaning him, feel less valued or separate or different, a reminder that she is not truly, quote, one of them, or an indicator or warning that she is not or he is not truly one of them. So what is that? I look at this object. Before I look at this object, I pulled a quote from the Edgar Casey, An American Prophet book by Sidney D. Kirkpatrick. And I just highlighted what I had already shared. Warm and welcoming, but there's something sharp and jagged or abrasive or undesired. Where did it come from? Unexpected, agitated, like a random piece of metal tossed in the machine. And I expand on this a little bit further on my next slide, but from the book here, a far more serious accident occurred on May 27, 1880, when Edgar, now 3 years old, fell headfirst off a fence post onto a board with a nail protruding out of it. The nail went so deeply into his head that it reportedly punctured his cranium and entered his brain cavity. Leslie, his father, who had seen the accident happen, immediately ran to him and removed the nail. Carrie, his mother, was following close behind. After the initial trauma of the fall, Edgar appeared to be perfectly fine. Turpentine was poured onto the open wound, the head was bandaged, and the child eventually resumed his normal play. He continues, the degree to which this injury may have left lasting psychological damage or altered Edgar's normal brain development is not known. It must be pointed out, however, that other psychics, among them Dutch-born Peter Herkos, attributed the development of their psychic abilities to similar blows they suffered to the head, which they believe stimulated their pineal or pituitary glands. Little or nothing is said about this incident by those who knew or wrote about Edgar in the later years, perhaps because Casey himself believed that his gifts were given to him from God and were not of physiological origin. At this point, we have no way of knowing where his gifts came from. Are they connected to this impalement of a nail into his head as a child? Did they come from God or from a higher power? Or is it a combination? What I'm finding in my life, where I'm left in awe sometimes, are the synchronicities of things. The way seemingly unrelated events are linked at a later point in time when you look back and realize the big picture. Because I had this seemingly random thing happen at some point in my life, it has now landed me here that has taught me this great profound insight. I've had several of those opportunities where I feel like I'm glimpsing the matrix or seeing the source code sometimes. It seems so, You just see that connection, that thread. And I feel that at times there may be a higher power, and I don't mean that in the religious sense. Maybe it's a program. Maybe we're running through some kind of simulation that's already happened. And as you see in some of my data later, it's quite possible. But you can see the threads of it. And well, I wonder if there's, if you look at the Kybalion, everything is mind, right? And everything is, and I had in another session, another project that I was working on, it was talking about this great mind. And maybe it's this one. Anyway, the experience of time. I think it is this session. I'm going to talk about time a little bit later. And what you can do when you experience time simultaneously, all time simultaneously. So please hold that in mind. I'm going to come back to that concept, which I think is important. Talking about the now at that point and time at another point when you have a goal that you're working towards. And that's, I think, a theme that comes through with this. And I'll expand on that. I don't want to get ahead of myself. So I drew the object here. It was gray, light brown, or moldy green. And it was bent like this. This could very well be a nail that I'm drawing on the right-hand side. The object feels like it impacted the mind of Life One. Physically travels through the body to her head. And I also wrote it impacted her heart. I have a scale of the object, this little dot inside the hand, a contagion, contaminant, a foreign body. Obviously, that's a lot. The thing on the hand is a lot smaller, but it could have been a fragment of the nail that was left in his mind, in his head. A piece of rust, a piece of metal that fragmented off. Who knows? I mean, they didn't do surgery. They just poured turpentine in his head. So maybe there was still something left in the mind from this piece of metal. I don't know. But that's what my data was telling me here. I had a structure moving upwards or being built. And this was amazing to me. I've never had an experience like this before. It was a very clear visual. And it was time lapse of the construction of a structure. It was very busy. It was like a construction site. I saw this crane vehicle. And if you've ever watched a time lapse, and you've seen this online now of something being built, right? They'll set up a camera and they'll leave it there for like weeks. And you see everything moving really fast and you just watch this thing be built. And I saw this time lapse and it was like I was just sitting there. Or if you've ever seen the modern version of the time machine where he would sit in his time machine and he just looks and you watch societies just rising and falling. And I was watching this building be erected so fast and all the people moving and all the machinery moving. And I've never experienced time in that fashion. I was just watching it. I was just watching it go by. And it was such a cool experience for me. I wanted to know, why is this construction important? And I needed to understand it was to show me the passage of time. It was longitudinal or long term. I'm moving through time from a perspective where it looks like time lapse. I see this building. What's that word? But I see this building, but to a certain stage, maybe 25%. I wasn't going past that. I don't think there was any significance to why. I just kept watching it built to about 25% of completion, but it was going so fast. It was really, my words can't even capture how neat of an experience that was for me. And then I had a break in the time lapse. Now is far in the future, more advanced tech and architecture. Smooth metal alloys, white vehicles flying, smooth towers, like the Jetsons. A city in the sky, a model home for families in the future. This feels like a 1950s brochure or advertisement. The object feels like it, and now I'm back to, I think, that little metal object. Feels like it impacts the mind of Life One, physically travels through the body to her head. It impacted her head. So again, I'm back to that metal object, and we're seeing time lapse, and we're looking into the future, and we're at that theme again of the passage of time, and looking at time from these different perspectives here. Again, this is the full page of it now. This is what happened here. I shared a portion of it because it was relevant to that previous page. So again, I'm looking at this as a contagion, a contaminant, a foreign body, and then I took a break and went to look at some of the energetics. Energetics are coming from the minds of the life forms in one direction and from the structure or event in another direction. There was intention, focus, and intentionality. It was done with a purpose. So now I think the minds that I'm looking at are, as per the tasking, any beings that Edgar Casey encountered when he passed. But I suspect, given these themes of time, that these beings were with him, whether he was aware or not, throughout his entire life, his entire existence. So I've got these minds, and with energetics, and let's explore this a little bit further. So they had vision and focus, and I described them as an AOL of like an oligarchy, this ruling body. They were a collective, a shared consciousness with shared intent and ideas. We are all working towards the same goal, but this is a very strong idea, a manifestation in action, the creation and birth of a conception action, or a concept, not conception, concept in action, a creation coming from an idea and then spawning a chain reaction of events. It feels like the creation of a universe or timeline, or a major change in the timeline. I wrote that this is a beautiful process. This feels so, I can't even read my handwriting here. Exciting. This feels so exciting, I wrote. That was my aesthetic impact. It was like cellular mitosis. Each layer divides into several more, expanding exponentially. So we had these connected life forms, and they had this shared idea. And really, this is, what's interesting, this is a process, a theme that I've been studying in my own life in terms of manifesting. And this feels like manifesting at scale. This is manifesting aspects of reality. This was done with intent and focus. And this group that Edgar Casey was somehow connected to, and I don't feel that he was one of the manifestors. I want to be clear about that. He was connected to them and somehow in communication with them, but he was not one of these manifesting beings. But I feel that this group would intentionally say, here's what we want to bring forth into existence. And they would come together and set it out there and then watch it create. So you've got this idea that they have together. They do their intention work through consciousness, and then it's out there, and then it explodes into the different parts, and then each part separates out into other aspects of this giant creation, really. And this is one of those pieces where I've been getting data on various projects about the act of creation. I'm seeing the different elements of it. And this is another project which I think fits into a larger theme of things that I've been exploring in how consciousness can bring about creation. I just listened to a Dolores Cannon short this morning, and she said that, in order to graduate from this school of Earth, you need to learn how to manipulate energy. And how do you know that you manipulate energy is through the act of intentional creation. I thought that was interesting timing that I came across that. And maybe that's just AI with my algorithms. But I listened to a short the other day too, and I haven't verified this, but I'm gonna mention it here because I think it's relevant to this sketch here. Edgar Casey, I guess somebody says they found a lost manuscript from Edgar Casey, and again, I need to verify this. I just haven't had the time to do this yet. And Edgar Casey went over, the seven stages that you can experience after death, which is highly relevant to this. So maybe I'll have a link somewhere because I saved the video. And one of the things that was mentioned in this video that allegedly Edgar Casey had said is one of the stages, I think the fourth stage that you go through, is you look at what could have been. And so you go through all the possible choices you could have made in your life. And they said this is very hard to process. But you see what could have been. I went this direction or I went this direction. I married this person, I married that person. And then all the infinite possibilities that stem from that. But then what they said was, and then the hard thing to realize is that every one of those aspects actually happened and actually exists. And why that resonates with me is because that's something that I've been really exploring a lot, especially in my writings for The Hive. If you followed my science fiction series, The Hive, and again, maybe I'm just exploring my own science fiction ideas, and it's coming out in remote viewing, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I am exploring these big concepts that actually exist out there, and I'm getting access to them at a pace and time where I'm able to process them and share them. But that was a powerful thing to hear, to then realize that I have data that possibly supports that. And that supports the multiverse idea. It basically, with infinite possibilities, we are making every single possible choice. And those realities exist. And if you read my Hive series, you'll see I really take some time to explore that. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and very exciting project and data point to come across. And then to find that feedback, which I haven't verified yet, but if that feedback is legit, if that's something that he actually said, I think that's very significant. So if any of you watching has a reference point to that, please let me know if we can verify that. But that's something I'm working on verifying because it feels important to me. Okay, so talking about a little bit more about this oligarchy or this ruling group, they can see this all in action. Talking about the creative process, every step as they visualize and manifest, they can visualize the ripple effects through time. This has an impact on society. This feels like the mental visualization and manifestation of the evolution of society over time. Let me say that again. This has an impact on society. It feels like the mental visualization and manifestation of the evolution of society over time, approximately 1 to 300 years ahead. Before I move on from that, and I'll get into this a little bit later too, in saying this is where we want society to go, regardless of where they are now. Let me hold the other data point I want to talk about till I get to it. But this was like an AI projection model, but in the mind or from the mind. Layers of society visualized over time that eventually leads to an off-world society or colony. So I saw that this is where this was going to. And I thought this was so very cool. So this ruling body eventually wants our society to go off-world. What do we have to do to manifest that, to create that system of reality? It was really neat to see them go through that process. The group physically holds hands. It felt like a focused, intentional group visualization. I sensed there was some kind of mantra that was being said. There was a clear focus and intention. The end goal is identified. Then they connect and close. I'm sorry, it says close. My handwriting's atrocious when I'm writing fast. They connect and close their eyes. They chant and focus and watch the vision begin as the manifestation builds. This was this really just beautiful process of connection through a group. And again, it's the end result. And it's if you've studied manifestation, you're not saying I want this to happen. When you say I want this to happen, what you're reinforcing is this hasn't happened. They're experiencing the end result. This is what this society looks like. This is what it feels like. It's already here. We can go visit it. We see it so clearly. That's how strongly they're manifesting it, and they're putting it out there in the universe, saying this is, let it be so, basically. This is the initial call to action. They create in this space, and then the action steps begin and are put into motion. This is a part of a beauty. There is an aspect, of beauty to this process. So that's how they create it. That's all they do. Not all they do, not to downplay it, but they put the intention out there and then it just goes to work. They just watch it happen. It's almost kind of like the sperm fertilizing the egg, right? If you've ever seen those or those videos where now you've got the egg and it's vibrating, and then it splits into 2 cells, and those 2 cells split into 4 cells, and then 8, 16, 32, 64 exponentially. And that's what this was like. It was like, in order to get to this society, first this event has to happen, and this event spawns these events, and then these events spawn these events, and everything just goes out. It was such a cool thing to see. So here's my summary here, just a quick summary at the end. And this is me just disciplining myself more as a remote viewer. I was done. I knew that I was in charge of getting my feedback whenever I wanted it. And I wrote, I'm tempted to stop and look at the tasking because I'm so intrigued here. But I'm going to do another session later and keep exploring this target. I'm really trying to flush things out of my system. As a newbie, you'd work the target really quick and you'd look at your feedback. Was I right? And I'm beyond that now. I still get excited. I still get into ego a little bit. But now beyond, am I right? I don't want to do the target and then say, man, I wish I would have gotten more information on that. Now I want to know, am I thorough? Did I fully explore this? Did I take the time to explore this and not get blinded by my need to know if I was on target? Been there, done that. And I think it's important to now work on making sure I've said everything that I feel I need to say. So going back on, I was in a very strong state of flow once I got to the manifestation visuals. This feels like the creation of an idea that leads to major societal changes, or the construction or creation of something. There's a group of life forms working collectively to build or create. Another life who is part of the group but somehow separate may have an issue or disagreement and struggles with that because, I wrote, she wants to belong but does not agree with the trajectory or plan. So tying this into the tasking, maybe Edgar Casey, after he died, encountered this group and disagreed with where they wanted to take society. Now, take someone from the late 1800s who's looking at a ruling body that is creating a society with flying cars and skyscraper cities, and he's just a farmer who's just getting into photography, basic photography. Maybe that's an overwhelming thing. I'm 100% speculating here, but maybe he disagrees with what they're doing or how they're doing it. Maybe he's having an issue with, hey, what about free will? You guys are now dictating where society is going to go. You're influencing people's minds and decisions and actions. I know that would probably frustrate me in understanding, well, I thought we were making our own path, but it's really you that's planting these seeds in our minds to get to your vision of what you want. So there's a whole lot of possibilities there. It's right now I can't verify any of that, but it's fascinating to think about. All right, so my second session, I feel that I was really looking at these Akashic Records. I have a lot of big questions that come with this. Why? Why am I seeing this? Obviously, this is an important aspect of who Edgar Casey was. Is it tied to the tasking? Maybe. Is it just something that was luminous, connected to Edgar Casey? Maybe. But why am I seeing this? And I'll get into some of my big questions as I go through this, but I feel that this is, number one, such a gift and an honor and a privilege to be able to have this experience, to try to describe something like this. I think that this is something we all have access to. Call it the Akashic Records, call it the ether, call it AI, call it the great mind, whatever it is. We all have access to it. I suspect this ties into what we're accessing when we do remote viewing. And I suspect that understanding what this is can help us to better understand this reality. I do think that's very important as I go through this session here. So right back to it, I had a structure and I had life. And I had this rising, expanding, filling around. It was like a big gray balloon with ridges in it. And it was just, I had like a hot air balloon. It was gray, stretchy and thick, rubbery material, and it just expanded. It was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I had that structure at the bottom, which reminded me of that factory that I drew on my very first slide here. So it rises. There are squared sections defined by raised ridges, which are thick parts of this material. It expands. As it expands, it increases in surface tension. There was a lot of white noise, like crowd sounds that I was hearing with this. It was busy and it was bustling, like downtown metropolis, and also like a blimp, just this expanding blimp. There was a vibration that rippled through the object. There was a weak point. It was thinner or being stretched thin, and a humming sound, like a wham or a doom. Which I think that's what it was, like a doom. That's what I heard, like a doom. Once you hear it I can almost hear it in like a movie or something. But just this low bass hum sound. It was a single beat. Now I had anxiety. My heart was in my throat here. It was hard and solid, but there was a stable aspect. There was a sense of reassuring confidence, continued expansion and reinforcement. And I was just like, this is unsinkable. And then it contracted a bit and it solidified and it had this hardness to it. And there was these energy wave pulses back and forth, left to right over it. They were neon green, purple, blue, and there were just these beautiful pulsing waves of color across this object or this structure. And then I shifted, and I had this life here, and they were intelligent, they were mesmerizing. I'm still talking about this structure here before I move to the life. This object was intelligent and mesmerizing, was like a billboard, as if it came to life. There were claps and cheers. Also a casual, like business as usual feel, amusement or amusement park or a simulation. This is my analysis of this. This is a continuation of that creative process. And I suspect that this object, whatever it is, and we'll get into it, this is what was created by those minds with their intention. And it was amusing to them. Amusement or amusement park for entertainment. And if you think of the simulation argument, you think of, video games and virtual reality. What's that? That's for our amusement, for our entertainment. And I even wrote the word simulation so it comes to life, but it's also business as usual, which to me indicates they've done this before, which to me suggests there are multiple, we'll say, projects or simulations or realities that this ruling group has created. So then I shifted and I'm looking at this life. Like what is that word? Okay, so this was entertainment. They were walking and they were energized. They were on stage, and I had this energy around them that I referred to as pyrotechnics. I did have a top hat on this life. I didn't draw it, but you can see the little cape down there. I know there is a picture of Edgar Casey wearing a top hat. What's going on here? Let me see if it's on the next slide. Yes. They were speaking. It was coming from the heart. There was anxiety in the gut, and I had the words, "Our Fathers." I tried to probe the document and I went blank, and then I had the term expansion. And then the Terra Papers, which was, I believe, Robert Morningsky's work on, which I think led to him talking about something akin to like the soul trap, stay away from the light and all of that. It's been a while since I've looked at that. And then the Panama Papers, which was an intelligence thing. That's a whole different story, but it was the papers theme, but the Terra Papers, I think, is the stronger AOL here. Nervousness. This felt out of character for this life. And then I was moving to a point in time and space. I'll come back to that in a minute. Let's say that here. Move to a point in time and space that will clearly articulate the purpose of this movement. Relaxing, relief, calm, and stress-free. Life is falling back, laughing to relieve stress, relief, and love. This is a bed that I drew here. You can see the pillow here. You can see the mattress. And life had their hands up, and they were just falling back. So what I did is I gave myself a movement so I could better understand why this life was on stage reading this book and, the term Our Fathers. So the backstory that I found was that two pieces to this, and there's more to it, but Edgar was having trouble with some of his studies at one point, and I guess a woman or an angel appeared to him and told him, if you sleep on your book, you're going to memorize everything that's in the books. So he started sleeping on his books and memorizing things, and he used to recite it to his class. He was appointed a position as a young child. He had this higher position in his church. He was the scholar. He had, there was a term for it. He was able to just recite everything. At one point, his father noticed or challenged him that he, to memorize something just by touching it or without touching it, without looking at it. He memorized this essay, this very long essay. I forget how many pages or words it was. It was a very long essay. And then he presented it to his school, to his classmates the very next day. He recited this entire book that he had read without reading it. And I think that's what I'm picking up on here is that story. So the term Our Fathers, well, it was his father who challenged him or tested him to memorize that essay without reading the book itself. And then he had to go to school, and he was on stage to present that essay to his peers and his teachers. And I have him falling into bed here because what that angel told him was when you sleep on this book, when you sleep on your books, you're going to remember them. So I think that's the whole piece that I'm picking up here, which really blew me away to see that. Is his ability to memorize things. And it's, I think what's significant is that I moved to a time and space where I could understand what was happening. And it was him falling onto a bed, which is how he was reading some of these books, by sleeping on them. I thought that was really cool, though. Okay. So I wrote, she's not alone. Male life with her, love and kisses. She, meaning he. I was interpreting Edgar Casey as a woman. And the male life very well could have been his father. He was a child. The father was there. And I want to describe the cause of stress. Tension, nervousness, anxiety. Hands were on the belly. Preparing to speak or present. And again, that was in the early days when he was figuring out these abilities, and he presented to his entire class this essay that he memorized without reading the book. All right, I took a break there from that thread, and I moved to the energetics. And you see these little numbers here. It ties into the ideogram that I showed at the very beginning. Energetics. Waves or layers, expanding, going from within, bubbling, carrying and overlapping. Infinite possibilities in a finite world. And I had an AOL of timelines and creation. So this sketch does it no justice. I want you to picture a multicolored lava lamp moving fast. And it was these blobs that just were spinning and spiraling and going in chaos, in just such random directions. And I just watched this thing changing and bubbling. It was beautiful to see, and obviously I can't draw that, not with a little pencil on a computer. But it was just this three-dimensional, growing, changing blob, which I feel was tied to, again, this concept of timelines and creations. It was explosive. It expands out, and then it self-contains and comes inward. So it was going really big, and it was coming in and containing everything. It was blobular, is what I wrote. Wet-like, gooey, sticky, absorbent. An awkwardness to the movements. It does not seem natural, at least from my perspective. So fast, it seemed jerky. It was just jumping. It was moving so quick. So I slowed it down. Slow down the movements and describe. And I wrote, this is an expanding wave. It contains information and visuals. And I wrote like TV. And I had an AOL that there was communication happening. That visual that I had, I have these blobs, and through the blobs I was seeing images of people. It was like watching one of the old movies or something where they're having a flashback or something. They see the translucent faces having memories flashing through the screen or flashing through their mental field. And I was seeing all of these different scenarios that they were just going by so fast, where it just felt like there were so many things happening within this blob. All this data that was like watching TV just float through it. It was clear and jelly-like, wavy air, but has a type of mass. It impacts the mind in a way that was entrancing. And now, again, Edgar Casey would go into trance to access the Akashic Records. And that's what I think I'm looking at here, these records. And had an aesthetic impact of a headache. And maybe that's just because it was hitting the mind here. This object changes and adapts, and then it dries, it crystallizes, and it hardens. And it had this hard outer shell. It was brittle and flaky and charred. So you're having all of these experiences that were happening within this expanding timeline, consciousness, all these visuals there that are going through this. And then it freezes and it hardens and crystallizes on the outside and then becomes like this flaky, charred, brittle shell just on the outer aspects of it. So there it is, and it went quiet, undisturbed, dormant, muffled. But I wondered, what's on the inside? There were signals trying to emerge. There's a point of safety. From within, there's a limit on possibility. God, I'm connecting things now. Fear and anxiety, patience, growth. Observed from the outside, the shell breaks and turns to dust, the outer shell, like a glowing jewel or diamond, like almost like shiny like the Chicago bean. And it was so beautiful. And this is post incubation. What I'm wondering here is inside, I'm wondering what is being created, I think, is aspects of consciousness in a simulation that is evolving. And this ties in, I got to do a bigger conversation about this. This ties into other sessions that I've done. Sorry, I'm just experiencing all this right now. That session I haven't released yet, at one point, my awareness went into a space where it was experiencing a barrier. And it was trying to get through the barrier, and it said, but if I go through this barrier, I will cease to exist. So, and I feel that this is a very similar data point right here. So I think you have consciousness in here, and it can't get out. And like, what am I doing right now as a remote viewer? I am trying to escape the matrix, right? I'm trying to see what's beyond. I'm trying to see what's out there, outside of my own mind, outside of my own awareness, outside of this reality, outside of this planet, outside of this universe. And I'm wondering if that's what happens within this thing that just solidified. So in the end, it's this beautiful object, crystallized object that's just glowing and shiny. There was an intentional process of randomness and chaos and containment and growth. Emergence as something new. It was hard, solid, clear, and blue. It was changed. Wisdom through pain. An element of danger or a threat if provoked. And I think about, when I read that, all of the pain and suffering that humanity goes through, that I've gone through in my life. And in the end, like a piece of coal under pressure, it becomes a diamond. And is that what I'm witnessing here? Just an element of our reality and of our experience through pain and suffering to get us to whatever this end goal is. I heard sounds and harmonics when I touched it, because in the state I was in, I went and I touched it, and it rang like glass. It was very high pitched, like if you flick very like diamond glass or whatever. There's communication, but why? What is being transmitted? My story, our story. We are one. A signal of contentment, reactionary intelligence, something skyward. Life through memories. Everything appears frozen within, but this contains the data of everything, and it is processed or observed in an experiential way. I wasn't sure that I liked this, and I had an AOL of being trapped. I'm feeling emotional right now talking about this. Life through memories. To me, what that makes me think of is that me, my life, my existence, my reality right now is a memory. That we are the experience of a memory, of something that has already happened. And everything was frozen. And what are we really, if you break it down? Everything is just micro moments. And you could, and from the right perspective, you can experience any one of those micro moments at any point in time. So to me, I feel like I'm moving fluidly, but from an outside perspective, I can look at one point and say, oh, there's a micro moment. He's frozen right there. And everything was still. All the TV screen movements that it was, as it was evolving, everything had frozen. Everybody was just like this, just really still. I feel like I was looking at a fragment of our reality. And I have such mixed feelings about that. What's most important for me to know? I had a sensation of a buzz, an electromagnetic surface layer. It's a field that wraps around it, naturally generated from the material, from the new material that it is made of. This material was a conglomeration of elements that through time and pressure morphed into something new, like turning lead into gold, but this deals with consciousness. It's amazing. And then I had the thought, escape. I can feel this field. Beneath it is the smooth, hard outer shell, so smooth, smoother than glass, and hard and thick, slippery like ice because there are no imperfections, no friction, just smooth. I had an AOL of a brain. Everything is mind if you study the Kabbalion, right? Internal energetics, swirling and churning. Processing but not logically, thinking in multiple dimensions simultaneously at multiple points in time, which is why from some perspectives it seems like many voices singing as one. But this is one mind experiencing all concepts in time at a single moment. It exists through all time, but from its perspective, all time is a single moment, a singularity event. So this is what blew me away, is that really I'm a fragment of consciousness. And I'm experiencing my aspect of reality. And I'm doing what I perceive as my part to make my way, to make changes, to navigate and have my experiences. But this mind has experienced everything that has ever happened within this system of reality and in one single moment. And it evolves. The point of it is evolving this consciousness, which means, and I think this ties into Mandela effect stuff. What this means is that if it wants me to build this city in the future that's going to be somewhere off world, at the same time that it's trying to get me there, it recognizes in order for me to do that, this needs to happen 300 years ago. And it's changing the past at the same time that it's changing the future and the present. I'm experiencing the present, but all of these things are happening at once for this mind or this system, if that makes sense. And in session, I understood this. I felt this so clearly. It's all happening simultaneously from that perspective. And it's like, yep, I'm just making this. And I'm going to polish this end right here, and this end is going to change what happens here. And that's why I'm talking about the synchronicity, understanding for whatever value Edgar Casey and his gifts served for this system. It has the ability to, well, if he needs a nail in the head, in order for this to happen, he's going to fall at 3 years old and get a nail in his head. It had the ability to impact things like that because it could see, as we talked about in that earlier sketch, the ripples through time based on the manifestation of an idea or a concept. It was really fascinating. So in the end, I was getting these two perspectives. There was the outside human perspective, which is someone like me, viewing glimpses or moments, detecting linear signals, but not understanding beyond the isolated harmonics, not realizing they are hearing past, present, and future all at once. How can they? This human mind cannot process data across time into a single moment. I think that was Edgar Casey and my mind included. But I was also seeing that larger mind. So from the human perspective, I don't know that our minds are capable of understanding everything all at once, or processing it all at once. We can take moment by moment by moment to understand it, and then we can see a bigger picture. But this was processing everything at the same time. This was this was a powerful experience for me. And as I'm going through this, I'm seeing threads in other sessions. Maybe I'm making it all up. We can't verify this. What would be helpful is if I can corroborate some of this from other experiencers, other people who have glimpsed things like this. But again, we could say, well, maybe you read that and forgot about it. I know there's a lot. I'm not claiming this is true. I'm sharing my experience. And I feel I need to disclose that. It's important to go out and verify and validate. I mean, that's the purpose of this, right? But I have other threads. If you've seen my session where I followed a man after he died. I was looking at a volcano target and I found a life that died and I followed him but into the afterlife, and he was in this orb, this pod, very similar. And after he died, there were these beings that got him to this point, and he had a life review. And then I found all these orbs were in like a giant garden bed, and there was a gray that was tending to them. The gray could stick its finger in each orb and influence each reality. Each reality was different. It was catered to the consciousness that was in there because it was refining consciousness. That's the theme that I got in that other session as well, as consciousness was being refined and experience was being changed. So some people were experiencing this dystopian reality, and other consciousness was experiencing, utopia. Just to show the two extremes as an example, it was whatever that consciousness needed, and it was changing. As they were going through these life reviews, the experience was changing. I think these are the concepts I'm trying to understand. So it was a fascinating session. This is one that will sit with me for a very long time. And I'm thankful for it as I continue to use remote viewing as a tool to try to understand my own mind, my own consciousness, my own existence, my own reality. And this bleeds through in a lot of the things that I do, in the work that I do. For sure, these concepts, I'm exploring them and I share this because I'm almost finished writing book 3 for the Hive. And that Hive book started out with Edward's descriptions of a collective and an AI integration with the human mind, which then tied into so many other things that I've been exploring. It's why I was drawn to him, because of that cue ball session that he did. I feel that this is an important theme, and I feel that with the way AI is coming on right now, and this was it was a fear in the beginning. I don't know how I feel about it now. I feel that aspects of my consciousness wants to ascend and to transcend. My fear with AI and newer states of reality is that will actually, even though it may be a wonderful experience, it will cause aspects of us to descend. And that doesn't mean hell, it doesn't mean evil, it just means another layer deeper. And for some of us, that might be necessary for this process of refinement. But for those of us that are trying to achieve that escape velocity, to look beyond the barrier and see what's out there, I think AI can be a hindrance in some ways to that process if we're ultimately uploading our minds. Because it sounds like our consciousness is already existing within some kind of giant mind or database. Something that I suspect, if any of this is true, I'm understanding a very tiny fragment of it. All right, truth seekers, I've rambled on enough for this one, but this was a big important project, and I'm glad I did this because going through this, I made connections that I haven't made before. Being able to talk to all of you out there allows me to process my data fully and I think get it out of my system so I can move on to the next adventure. If you'd like to see more of my work or check out my books, you can visit sixthsensemedia.net. Be sure to check out the Future Forecasting group as well, and see what the other remote viewers are doing. And you can check out our work with the Rabbit Hole group as well, Down the Rabbit Hole through Future Forecasting. We're doing very, I'd say, wonderful work, incredible, interesting, fascinating work, looking at a lot of these mysteries here. So check it out if you'd like to know more. I'd love to hear comments. I'd love to hear thoughts and feedback on this one because this, for me, this was a big one. So I'm Dennis Nappy II with Sixth Sense Media. Remember to never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.